Hello, welcome to another episode of the podcast. I must tell you, I asked my dog to join me in the room before I started this recording. Now, there's a little bit of thunder, and she doesn't like thunder, especially the song by Imagine Dragons. No, she likes the song, she doesn't like the act of nature. She was a little scared, so I asked her to join me because she likes to be around someone she trusts. I don't know if she trusts me, but she likes to be around someone when there's thunder and lightning. And I asked her to come in, and she's like, nah. And she's so silly, dude. She's at the door, at the entrance. I said, come in, and I try to pull her in, which I suppose some people be like, don't pull her, don't coerce her, let her come off her own volition. I'm like, dude, just come in. I need to start recording. And she's like, no. She's going back and pulling her. And then I close the door. Now she's like, trying. I said, if you start scratching at the door, if you start making noise during the recording, I'm going to be very upset. But she hasn't started doing it yet. So I just wanted to tell you that. Anyhow, it's been an interesting weeks. It's weird when I do this introduction a little earlier than the release of this episode, because I kind of have to preempt when this is coming out and kind of make up for the time between when I record and the release. But this is going to be coming out, if you're listening to this right now, on somewhere around the 20th of May 2099. But been a brilliant couple of weeks. I've got a lot of my heart is full of joy. And I want to do an episode about what and why I'm feeling like this. Because, hey guys, I became a father. How cool is that? And I don't know. I don't know what I'm feeling. It's just amazing. It's such a great sense of, I don't know what it is. And I really don't want to kind of dramatize it, at the same time not do justice to the feeling, because it's something that a lot of people will tell you that, it's once in a lifetime feeling, you can't put words to it. And I really can't put words to it. But I think I want to just sort of understand, the whole build up of my wife and I going through this, expecting this little baby, and then the whole sort of idea of the birth, and then this thing of labor. And man, first of all, all women, fucking respect, dude. You guys are made of something which is truly something else. I don't think any man should even come close to commenting on your body. I don't think any guy has a fucking right to tell you what to do with your body, because whoa, respect. And it's just amazing to understand all these things, man. I don't know. I don't have any take on it yet. I just need to process. I need to internalize it a little longer. But I'm just so thrilled that I have this little baby. My wife and I, we have a baby girl, and we're extremely thrilled that she's with us. And I just want to process all these emotions. And I want to, at points, it's the mundane kicks in, right? The ego and the interference from other people, their comments, their advice, and what to do, what not to do. They're like, oh, is that the name? Is this not the name? Etc., etc. So I'll tell you on next week's episode, I'll take you through what I'm feeling. But I don't know exactly what I'm feeling. I know I'm feeling really thrilled. I'm feeling really, really something deeper than I've felt in a long time. And every time I kind of come back to the ordinary and just go like, oh, the petty, mundane worries. I'm like, wait a second, you fucker. You have a child. And it really does just take you back from this stuff that you tend to get caught up in, which is so trivial, which is so unimportant, which is the stuff about the mind telling you that, oh, someone's wronged you, you can do better, you shouldn't have done this. It just seems so inconsequential when you're kind of place it against something which is so much beyond you, even though it's as a result of your wanting this life to come into your life. And it's just crazy because you kind of put something so beyond you within this framework of expectations, which is created by society, which is created by these conditions placed on you. And I don't know if that's the right framework, because of course this beautiful life, of course I have more bias because it's my child, and I have all these I have all this love, but at the same time, I'm just another human being who's confined and who's shaped by what I experience, by the circumstances I've been raised in, by the situation I live in, by the people and the frameworks around me. So I'm just trying to make sense of something so powerful, so divine, if you want to call it, of something so ancient, something so beautiful, like life being born. And at the same time, while I'm trying to be a parent who gives without expectation and tries to sort of think through this entire process without having a bias of projecting my insecurities, all these things on the side of all the mundane are such ego-based stuff, and then the other side. So I'm just overwhelmed with, I think the most amazing emotion, which is thing, is just that, wow, okay, let's just look at this beautiful life, and it's literally by words a human being. Fair enough. It's a baby child, I suppose. Those are words we use. But if you just look at it beyond any of these definitions and these words, this is just a being which is, of course, it's got certain genetic codes, it's got certain things which have come from us. But beyond that, it is something so ancient, so pure. And there's something magical in that idea alone, that we try to project all our learnings and the man-made discoveries and the man-made understanding of our environment and our universe onto these concepts. But I think we should just take a moment to sit back and see we don't have to we might understand the idea of birth. We might understand the idea of a child coming from an embryo and the various processes and the millions and billions of cells that are created. Like, fair enough. Brilliant. I'm glad we've achieved that kind of understanding. But if you look beyond all of that, just truly something spectacular. And I'm just amazed, right? I really don't have words to explain what I'm feeling. But one thing I do sometimes right now, I'm just like, oh man, because a moment I sit with my baby and I'm just in awe. And then I come out and then I'm just, slammed back into reality. I'm just sitting in traffic. I'm sitting with people who are yelling at each other. Every time you open a news app, it's just more horrific shit, like a journalist being killed and then her funeral being completely sort of derailed by police forces. Then you have the other things where you have some stupid celebrity trial. Then you have some other stuff where the people and kids being bombed in Ukraine. It's just like, what are we supposed to do? Because you kind of literally just look in to the crib and you're like, my God, this pure life. And of course, there's so many parents around the world. There's so many from human beings, of course, because we're so-called sentient, we so-called have the most understanding of our environment, but newborn life everywhere around us. And then you have this. So it's just truly one of those moments which is, sorry if I'm not communicating my feelings clearly, but I'm just truly, I think, thankful, and I'm just so excited. And at the same time, I'm a little nervous with what can I do as a guide, as a protector, as a father, as a friend. So there's so many things to understand and to kind of look at without projecting my fears, without putting forth my biases, putting forth my insecurities, kind of saying, oh, you got to do this because I couldn't. And at the same time, be someone who could just steer the person with the information that you have without kind of putting filters that suit you. And it's so many things. But I'm just excited. I'm extremely happy, extremely excited. I'm extremely thankful, and I'm extremely in awe of life and women. I salute all of you. The ones of you who've had kids, I think you know exactly why. And the ones of you who will, what's wrong with me? Clearly words are not flowing well. But those of you who will have kids, I think truly this is something I can communicate. This whole concept of feminism, right, is really become something which is ugly, which is become something militant. It's become male hating, right? It's like, oh, we are going to prove a point to the fucking man. And I suppose there is a reason for that, which is this sense of many or some or all, I don't know, I can't speak as a woman, feeling this sense of oppression, feeling this sense of wrong. And I get it. It's an automatic knee-jerk reaction when you're discriminated against, you're going to fucking fight back. But I think what I feel, and of course, I'm not a woman before you fucking bite my head off, there's this beauty of being a woman, which no man can take away, right? Which is this idea of having so much strength and having so much empathy, having so much love, having this ability to create life. And a lot of that's been taken away by this messaging saying, you gotta fucking wear a pantsuit and go work and fuck your this thing. And I'm like, why take away something so amazing? Why politicize a woman's body, politicize a woman's, a woman's power, a power to give birth to a life is so amazing. And why are you even comparing that to a job, or comparing that saying it's either this or either that? Because if you can't have a child, then you can't work, and then the man takes your position. Like, fuck, why are we going down that petty path? I understand there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of fucking rage, but man, I think we can work this out, because there really is something women should take back from this narrative is, dude, it's your body, it's your power, it's truly your power and you're truly your honor, your privilege, whatever you want to call it, to give birth to a life. And I think that is the power of feminism, right? It's not this shit of CEO, CFO, glassy. Okay, those things are there, but those things become a very sort of, they spiral out of control. They become a very petty, they become a very you versus I, become a very ego-based conversation for people who are just fucking pissed off, for fucking intellect, so-called people who just have nothing else to do. We're like, fucking, I'm not going to have a child because I believe in the power of my, do what the fuck you want, but don't demean other women, and don't put them down for saying, oh, homemaker, like if they want to have a child. I think that's the truest power. And I think I know some women who might not have a label, a position of a job which gets a high paying salary, but man, my mom, she has two kids. That's my sister and I. She's never had a so-called designated job. She hasn't got a job title. She hasn't got a resume, but man, the amount she's done. And I'm sure everyone listening right now has either a mother or a sister or an aunt or grandmother who might not be a conventional 20th, 21st century feminist in that sense of the definition, but they've done so much. They've held families together. They've supported the role of caregiver, of homemaker, of advisor, of counselor, of therapist, of volunteer, for social worker. There's so much, and needless to say, they fucking keep you fed. They keep you. You have someone to come home to. You know how important that shit is. That's the unit that is keeping you grounded in life, and it's being run by this boss person, if you want to call that word from the corporate world, this human being who's keeping that entire thing going and keeping that entire functioning system which you can rely on, which you look back on, which you're trying to recreate, and which keeps you completely aware of who you are. And you don't appreciate that, and you go to work and lick some fucking CEO's cock. Like, I mean, what the fuck are we even being told to do, man? It's ridiculous. And I don't know, I'm just being very sort of raw here. I'm sorry if it's a bit much, but I'm just truly blown away by where I am today, and I'm just really thankful for everything I have. And yeah, I will talk about it more at length in the next episode. But before that, hey, let's not digress too much, because I've got a fantastic guest on today's episode. He's a friend of mine. We go back a long way. We were in school together. His name is Mr. Varun Ravindra. He is someone who has had a very interesting journey from a stint in the corporate world of finance. I think he's a CA or CPA. I get confused between the two. Fucking, what's the difference? What is the P for? I don't get. It's like professional. I know it's something certified professional audit. I don't know. But it's a very interesting story what Varun's been through, because he did that which was expected of him. But he's also been influenced by his dad and his mom, and his dad especially in this particular context, because his dad had this love for farming and to sort of restorative practices in farming, and his mom's a doctor, and how those kind of values and that kind of influence shaped him into taking decisions which weren't what his peers and people around him and us were doing, and how that kind of one thing led to another, experimental sort of projects, from organic farming to then looking at how we have practices which have stripped land of nutrients and nutrition and having them left bare and basically toxic and dead, and how to look at practices maybe or opportunities bringing people together to restore these pieces of land, and as a result understand the entire underground network of soil, of the microbiome that exists in the soil, of course, because soil is the microbiome that lives within it, and all these various connections that you find between the soil and your entire experience as a human being, and for all other beings as well. So the entire conversation is really, really fun, really interesting, because Varun and I kind of just really had a interesting chat about what things are when it comes to farming, when it comes to agriculture, when it comes to practices within this space, and the entire idea of deforestation, the idea of trees, the idea of greenery, green cover, flora, fauna, blah, blah, blah. Some words, of course, are used, which I'm not really sure what they mean. But overall, Varun's doing some great work. Him and a few people, they run the project called Vanantara. The details are in the description. You can reach out to him either by going, I think, to the Instagram page, to the links which are in the description, or you can reach out to me and I can put you in touch with him. Having said that, you can reach out to me on SoapyRao. That's SoapyRao@gmail.com. Do share this episode if you like it, or if you don't like it, or whatever you feel, with anyone you like, with anyone you don't like, with your dogs, with whoever you feel like. So having said that, let's get into the conversation with Mr. Varun Ravindra. And as always, I appreciate you listening to this podcast, my friends. Thank you. Goodbye. God bless. Take care of yourselves. Cheers. Mr. Varun Ravindra, welcome to the SoapyRao show. Never thought we would be here without a drink chatting.
Morning, Soapy. It's always good to talk to you.
How's it going, man?
With the drink or otherwise?
I think nowadays it would be a little problematic on a Monday morning recording this. But how are you, bro? We've been chatting on and off, but it's been ages since we actually met and hung out. And I think you have been quite, I think you and Nirupa, your wife, have been quite engaged in a lot of these new activities, which are quite cool. I think you've been doing this, what's it called? Is it called a triathlon? Is it called half Ironman? What's the format called?
Yeah, so they're all, the broad terminology is triathlons. Okay. And in that you have different distances. So then it gets classified as sprint, Olympic, half, and the full Ironman. Yeah, but I've been all right. And those events have been fun last few months.
So did you guys get into it just to do it as a family, kind of travel together? Or was it like a health goal, or was it like because a lot of these things are kind of cropping up, right? A lot of people are doing it. They kind of, especially in our sort of age group in the late 30s, early 40s, people are like, oh, is it kind of, I don't know, was it, the people you meet as a result of doing these things, are they kind of like, do you find a common mindset amongst all of you, or is it some people doing it to prove to someone, or some people doing it for social media attention, are some people doing it to get their health back in order, some people doing it to get away from the corporate noise? So what are some of the things you're observing?
You had a couple of questions there, so I'll address all of them. I think the first one was how did we get into it, and why was it a family thing, or what drove it? And honestly, it was Nirupa who first got into it. She got into it a couple of years ago after we had our first baby, Tara.
Right.
And for her, I think it was a way to break the monotony of the typical exercise routine, and also which was restricted to primarily the gym and yoga, and to actually use your body once you've developed it, right? Because oftentimes when you do all of that strength training and all of that flexibility, you don't go on to use all of that ability. So doing a triathlon is a really nice way of being able to do that, and it's fairly demanding as well as you keep pushing the distances. So
you almost see like you see like, okay, this is what I put into my body, let's see what it can do. It's kind of like the input and the output measurement. That's quite a nice test against yourself, right?
And I think it's one of those things where you get feedback very quickly, right? Anything else you do in life, which primarily our lives revolve around a work day, it takes much longer to see results. Whereas there's just something so raw and gladiator like about any endurance based sport that appeals to human nature, right? That's also why we love sport, because it just tests physical ability. So I think sometimes doing these things, and you work for 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, and you're able to see how far you've come. It's one of those things where you actually get fairly immediate feedback to that extent. So I think there's so many reasons why it's appealing. And for me, it was a function of actually being around her that this grew on me. I've always liked sport and movement, but I definitely didn't have the inclination to plan an event and train for it and go to Dubai and wake up at 4 a.m. and swim in the ocean. It definitely wouldn't have been on my agenda, right?
I mean, it would have, but it would have been like after a night getting hammered.
Then I would
the starting point would have been like 7 p.m. and then this would be the ending point, but you started at 4 a.m., which is, no, it's quite a thing, man, because as you said, right, it's, I think we've kind of been active through school. We've done some sport or the other, right? Whether it was, our enforced PT classes to even some track. You and I were in the track kind of in the same house in school, and we would do some running races, and it wasn't really like a proper sports program. None of us did any training at all. Literally, sports day was 5 days a day. We would just literally, take off our shoes and run on the road. Like that's how much we prepared for it. But it's must be quite an interesting thing, because I met a couple of people who train Olympic athletes, right? And they basically have the entire team, from physical trainers to nutritionists to psychologists so it's quite, and even you kind of see it in the Western world, where people have an entire entourage of sort of things that go along with a particular thing. But now I wouldn't say now in the past year, but in the past decade, maybe that's being introduced, with Indian athletes getting that kind of support. But for you obviously had some help. Well, I think Nirupa had gone with a trainer who helped her prepare for this. But I think just from your experience, what's the kind of I think reward system, maybe one thing. I mean, that you kind of work towards, but also how do you convince yourself that, okay, I'll do it because it's fun, but also to get yourself into that space? What's the kind of approach you used?
See, for me, I don't. I mean, honestly, I'm sort of an accidental triathlete in some sense, right? Because this was never my goal. Nirupa was into it, and as a function of that, I think a lot of friends also got into it, and I was around a lot of people who were extremely enthused about doing this, and it was a situation where if anywhere a large group of friends was going to do this event. I think I always had the baseline level of fitness to do it. So I, in a sense, I kind of, with about 30 days training, just showed up for this thing and did it on both occasions. The Olympic and the half Ironman, which I did as a relay format with a friend of mine. So I never really went through the process of really grinding it out and having to motivate myself as much as some of these folks did, because for me it was just about participating and enjoying the feel of it. So so I recall even when we did the first Olympic distance in Croatia, that was maybe 50 days of training that I had.
So sorry, what's the difference between a half Ironman and Olympic?
So the Olympic is a 1.5 kilometer swim.
Okay.
Followed by a 40-kilometer bike ride, followed by a 10-kilometer run.
So that's like that's the baby format, kind of.
The one before that is a sprint, which is half of that distance.
Okay.
So the first one is the sprint, which is a 750-meter swim, followed by a 20K bike ride and a 5K run. Then the distance doubles to 1.5 kilometer swim, a 40K bike and a 10K run. And the half is a 1.9 kilometer swim. It's roughly about a 90K bike ride, followed by a half marathon, 21-kilometer run. So so the half marathon is fairly intense, because it's about even for someone who's doing it at a decent pace, it's above 6 hours, right?
The whole thing.
The whole thing of continuous movement. but for me, because it was more about just participating and being there and getting to the finish line, right? I kind of was able to, I think, take it in a little bit more. Like when we were in Croatia and we were cycling, I mean, I was actually looking around at the olive fields and the vineyards, and it's beautiful scenery, which and you can actually smile at all the people who are cheering you on, who have boards saying, smile, you paid for this. It's quite, it's cute,
But I always am fascinated by those people, man, because it takes one thing to show up for the event because you've trained and you've paid or whatever. And also the motivations are different. I want to talk about that and also come back to the questions I asked you earlier. But I mean, I always am fascinated by those people. Committed are they to supporting some strangers, right? Like, I mean, I understand if it's
amazing. It's amazing.
I mean, how bored are they? Like, I'm like,
well, the thing is, because of these events go through either a route where there's a cafe or there's a beach, it's not necessarily like they're coming and, stopping in the middle of nowhere. These guys are actually just there to sunbathe. And then they figure, if you're going to be sunbathing anyway, might as well have some fun at someone else's expense, or just drink.
I mean, many of it is sweet. I don't think anyone's there with the intention of putting.
No, it's amazing. Yeah, it's amazing. Like you really you have to give it up to those guys, because they're so encouraging. They're clapping for you and they're telling you, "Come on, you can do it." It's nice.
It must be, especially when you're in that thing and you're trying to push yourself, whether it's to win or to just finish it. You're already like, I mean. Dude, I don't know what it is, because I think you kind of go into a different space in your mind when you're crossing even like a 15K run, because you're already, as you said, moving continuously for 2-3 plus hours. It must be a different zone. You're not like in a 30-40 minute intense HIIT workout or something. It's just a different zone. So it must be quite cool. So
it's great. So I'll answer two questions of yours which came to mind. One was this one specifically about which also goes on to your previous one about what do you say to yourself to do these things while and before. And I think for many people, one is when you've trained for it for a long time, just the idea of finishing and reaching that finish line itself is a big motivation, right? Because it's the finale of 6-7 months of effort, twice a day workouts, etc. But specifically on the event, right? I'm the dialogue that you have to go through to keep pushing yourself. I can only tell you about mine, and I think everyone's is perhaps a slight take on this. You just have to keep convincing yourself that the distance and the time is not as much as it seems. Because for me, when I did both of them, my heart rate hadn't settled down as much as it should have post-COVID. So I had to go at perhaps a slightly easier pace than I would have liked to. But the conversation was sort of, like when you finished the 3K, I hadn't trained for the run. So when you finish the 3K, you tell yourself, okay, I just have 7 more 3Ks, right? And when you finish the 5K, you say, I just have 4 more 5Ks. And when you hit the 10K, you just say, I just have 1 more 10K to go. And then you just make the obstacles seem easier and easier as you go closer to it. The only point I kind of was a little disheartened was when I finished the 12K, and I was like, okay, now I'm over the halfway mark. And I looked at my time, and by then I'd slowed down to almost like a 9-minute pace for the kilometer. And I was like, all right, okay, just 9 more kilometers to go. And then it struck me 9 kilometers at a 9-minute pace was 81 more minutes. And then I was like, oh, okay, and then suddenly I started feeling the cramps and everything, just because you snapped out of that zone where you've made the obstacle seem easier than it is, right?
You've kind of raised the expectation and the burden of finishing, right?
Yeah. So it's always about just making it seem easier than it is. And I think that helps to just keep going.
Right.
But I think everyone's motivation is slightly different on this as it has to be. But I think for many people, they're looking for a challenge, right?
It's very interesting, the motivation, because I met this guy who does a ultra marathon. Basically, he runs it was in Bangalore a couple of years back at the stadium, which is the center for sort of athletics, the Kantirava Stadium. He did 100, I think 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. or something. So I asked him, what goes through your mind? He said, I just do calculations, I do formulas.
Yeah.
And I said, okay.
Yeah. No, whatever it takes. Like I remember when I was really tired, I started step counting, right? Because for my cadence was about 1,500 steps to the kilometer.
Okay.
So you just keeps counting 1 to 1,500, and that just keeps your mind on the process. You get into process orientation and stop thinking about what your body is going through. And when 1,500 seemed too much, then I broke it down into 150, because every 150 steps was 100
You
meters,
restart.
right? So
So
you restart. So I think everyone has some kind of variation of that. But what I found most beautiful was that, at one point my hamstrings started cramping, and there was a long way to go. And at that point, I was able to convince myself that, okay, I tell my body to stop loading my hamstrings and move the load onto my quadriceps and my calves, right? And I don't know how much of it was a placebo effect, but it allowed me to keep going because I didn't feel the cramps on my hamstrings anymore. So that mind-body connection also that you're able to achieve, in these endurance sports is quite special.
Yeah, it's amazing how, and I think a lot of these situations, from what you're speaking about to anything, right? Like whether it's relocating to a different country, it's kind of this mind body breath, if you want to bring into that aspect of living, how we are able to sort of convince ourselves and push ourselves as a result, whether it's allocating resources, whether it's telling ourselves just a little farther, or it's the mental motivation of why I'm doing this. It's quite brilliant how the body is able to adapt when the mind is okay with it. And similarly, when the mind says no, you can be and especially in today's climate of people struggling with depression, anxiety, and these things, when the mind is not in a state which it's able to cope with the environment, then even the most physically fit body just gives up. And you have a result of all these situations where we have like uncontrolled stress levels. We have people in our age group suffering cardiac issues. So it's really amazing how the flip is so drastic, but the positive mindset, or if you want to call it the enduring mindset, is able to take the body through a lot more. Because I think you'll admit that you're not like an A-class athlete. You're fit, but you're not like trained to be an Olympian. So it's amazing how you're able to do this, which is quite, and I think quite a cool sort of test for yourself, right?
I think that's pretty much what it is, right? You the ability for the mind to communicate appropriately to keep doing what needs to be done. And also to answer that question of what I see among the people in this community, I think one is all of these folks typically tend to be closer to 40, right? So they've gone through a few journeys in life, and I think everyone is always craving for a little bit of adventure. And this is in many ways a safe adventure, where and then you get to meet a lot of people who it's increasingly rare as you grow older to find people who are on the same wavelength, on the same page, with the same interest, because everyone's you bond only over shared experiences, right? That's why the camaraderie in school and in college can't be repeated, because once you get into work life, everyone's has a different day, whereas in school everyone has the same routine and the same day, so it's easier to bond over a shared space and shared experience. And I think that's what tends to happen when you do these amateur triathlete events. Everyone has some sort of a similar take on how they're feeling after a run or a swim, and what each of them is doing to fuel themselves, nourish themselves, motivate themselves. So the camaraderie is also something that I think encourages the community.
No, absolutely, because I think what happens is you kind of, as you get older, I think you tend to sort of stick to familiar relationships, right? And you rely on those, saying, oh no, my old friends, my school friends, my college friends, or my neighborhood friends, whatever the older things are, which need not necessarily be healthy for you, because as you prevent yourself from changing your outlook, or rather you might be changing already, but you don't want to tell yourself that your friendships might change because you're scared of the unknown, that if this network of friends goes, what is the new set of relationships hold for me. And this could be whether it's with family or friends, and we kind of just get stuck in that way of thinking. And the next thing you know, you're not sort of really giving yourself a chance to get out of that thing, because this sort of leads me to talking about what you've done with your projects, which you're sort of involved with right now. Of course, I think this idea of changing and kind of keeping fluid is so important, because what happens otherwise, you're like, you just sort of get stuck with the same conversations, you get stuck with the same way of looking at things, and we end up almost becoming 50-year-old kids who have emotional maturity of 6th standard or whatever, right? Because we're so scared of breaking out of that pattern of the way we look at friends or relationships, that we don't really grow up at the end of the day in a very simple way. So you went through that change from doing the prescribed things, of having a typical corporate job, of having, as you said, the Monday to Friday, the corporate work week, the corporate talk, the money talk, the savings talk, the friendships which are revolving around that. But then can you just sort of talk me through where your influences sort of were with this, and what you were looking at getting out of your career, and maybe from there we'll move on to what you're doing now?
Yeah, sure. So, just to help create the right context and background for the audience, because you know me so well, you know this many parts of this story.
Yeah.
So my qualification was as a chartered accountant, and I did pursue that role at Deloitte, which is a great organization to work for. And even when I got into early on into my role as a chartered accountant, I think I kind of had a sense that this wouldn't be something I would pursue for the rest of my life. It was the natural progression of the educational path that I had taken, which was commerce, and chartered accountancy was perhaps one of the the logical conclusions to a good degree coming out of that background.
Yeah.
And I knew, so when I got into it, I was doing it for the learning. I didn't necessarily think I would be pursuing a career as a chartered accountant. So I think that lens itself changed how I spent those years in the corporate world, because everything was about, okay, what can I learn from this, and what can I take away and apply later on?
Right. So not so much an outcome of where will I be in this job in 5 years? Will I have hit that peak position, the pinnacle of what is expected? But it was more like, let's use this time to understand what are the various things that are involved in this job or in this environment, right?
Yeah. And my father's a doctor, but he had chosen to move back to India from Kuwait because he wanted to get into agriculture and farming. He was very passionate about nature.
I didn't know your dad's a doctor. I thought he was always in this space. I didn't know that he was, because your mom's still practicing, right? She's a doctor.
She is. So he was, he read The One Straw Revolution, which is an incredible book on farming and very philosophical as well. And he was very moved by it. And I think that was also one of the large motivating factors for him to move back and start his own journey, because I think he must have been about 40 when he decided he would also pursue parallelly a sort of career or an occupation in agriculture. And I guess some of it is just osmosis, right? When you're around a person who's passionate about something, it's not that they necessarily have to educate you on what they did that day or their learnings, but just seeing how they are and what moves them, and it could be just random things, like we'd be driving on the road and he'd point out a tree and say, "Look at that tree, it's so beautiful, isn't it?" And it's stuff like that.
Sense of fulfillment, right? The way they talk about a topic, the way they talk about
you can see the magic in things because they see it sometimes, and I'm sure I was naturally inclined. That it's random anecdotes that I think about occasionally, which make me feel that there was this desire and interest early on. And I think having a father who was so passionate about not only trees and agriculture, but even animals, was a bit of a complete picture in the whole nature and environmental space. So, and while I was doing my chartered accountancy, there was, this was maybe 2006 to 9. Global warming was already something that was people were talking about. It had started becoming a serious issue. People were finally starting to think about it in a serious way and not ignoring it as they had earlier. And it appealed to me to be part of a solution in what way I could. So while I was at Deloitte, that would manifest in the form of me switching off lights, switching off people's monitors at the end of the day, trying to tell people if you inflate your tire, you save 5% of fuel. I was reading about all of these things and trying to do what I could from that sense. And after I completed my chartered accountancy, I was certain I wouldn't pursue that because it wasn't my calling. I think, and also when I realized it only much later when you read *Sapiens*, and you realize this idea of imagined reality. The whole financial system and the whole corporate system is just an imagined reality.
Collective agreement and understanding that we're going to give this and recognize this as valuable.
So it only exists because we all agree that it exists, right? And I didn't see it that way, but I think that was in large parts why it wasn't fulfilling, because it wasn't real. And my job in ensuring that somebody was honest and not cheating the system was perhaps for me not fulfilling enough to pursue that path.
I mean, it's you're kind of talking about how anti-fraud, prevent fraud kind of thing, right? It's almost like the system is designed to fuck itself, right? Because it's almost like you want people to go down that path, and they go down it, then there's more temptation, they make more. It's almost like the loophole is for them to stumble, right?
It's I know. I guess that's how humanity has played out for centuries. So I guess it's just a flaw. And people have recognized it and tried to contain it. But it wasn't my calling. I didn't see myself.
Just being the idea seems.
It's bizarre that it's happened so many times and continues to. But nature was fascinating. I think by that point I was interested in the idea of being part of the solution for something much larger than myself. And I think that perhaps was key in many ways. Trying to do something that was more than just about me and the money I make, but more about the planet, and creating ecosystems that would survive.
Right. So how do you, so your dad had a farm, he still has a farm. And so you spend a lot of time there because a lot of these things seem romantic, right? Everyone wants to do their part, at least they want to be seen doing their part, right? Like Earth Hour or Earth Day or cycling instead of taking a thing, or electric, or, I mean, at least the conversations seem like you have to be seen, like political correctness. You have to be seen saying the right thing versus doing the right thing. So similarly in this, like, or recycle or plastic, but it seems like nothing is enough. It's always that people will, maybe the activist will say, but how can you do this? It's always like us versus them, or the environment versus the corporate. There's never seems to be a place where you can start where enough is even something like, pat on the back, you didn't use a plastic bag, or you picked up a little bit of litter from somewhere. So how does someone, I mean, maybe you can just use your journey of getting away from the corporate world into this space as an example of how people can maybe start. And because sometimes it just seems like such an uphill battle, right? Like nothing seems enough in this particular fight, because for every plastic bag you pick up, there is billions of oil being spilt into the ocean, or there's people whaling, indiscriminately killing dolphins or pilot whales. So for me, I face this thing, right? I mean, I read an article where if we continue with this kind of increase in temperature, we're going to have like 4% of marine life wiped out by 2035, or some crazy number like that. So you almost feel like, me putting off the lights really going to help, or me not using the AC is going to help? Like, how does someone apply the reality of the problem to a practical solution in their own life?
Well, There's a lot of questions loaded into that.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, I ask a lot more questions than I listen to
Yeah,
answers.
yeah. So,
I should call
for
that.
me,
Yeah.
for me, when I got into the organic farming initially, and which then moved into now afforestation,
Yeah.
it was very simple, right? I didn't have responsibilities because I was not married. I had the luxury of taking a chance to try to do something I believed in,
Yeah.
and if I failed, I had a fairly decent degree, and I knew I could get a job at the end of it, even if this dream didn't work out, you know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so I think having a fallback, always makes it easier to pursue something that you really believe in. So it made the decision easier. But to be honest, I don't ever think I would have been able to go back to a corporate uh, system, because it's just because once you get a sense of the natural spaces, it's like coming home. It's where we all began, and we've moved so far away that we don't realize it. But when you spend enough time in natural spaces, there's just a rhythm and an energy that just seeps into you, and that's where you're supposed to be. And that's also why people love the beach and the mountains and all of these spaces, because that's where life is largely in balance. Right?
The connection's a lot closer, right?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
As opposed to, yeah.
So for somebody making a big leap, I think it's easier if you if the downside risk is mitigated, right? It allows you to take that leap of faith and try to do something. As for the other question, I think I don't. It's all a journey, right? There's always somebody doing a little bit more than you are,
Yeah.
and it's like that. It's like that old. It's like that old story that we read in school, where there's this girl picking up seashells and throwing it back into the sea, and the guy tells her, what difference are you going to make? And she says, it made a difference to this one, and sometimes that's all it is, right?
That's Greta Thunberg, right?
Yeah, maybe
Yeah, she's
next generation they'll be saying it's but I think what tends to happen is, when you get agitated and you look at this from a space of anger and sacrifice, it's a lot harder to make these things happen. When you say, I'm not going to use the AC because it's going to save the planet, and I'm going to put myself in discomfort in this 44 degrees heat, you can't. It's not. I mean, it's very short term, because you are going to rebound. There's so much.
You're going to have a kind of almost like a vengeful reaction.
Yeah,
saying, screw
without
this.
realizing, right?
Yeah.
So it has to come from a larger space, right? Not from a space of sacrifice or a space of anger that I'm doing more than the other person is, and they should be doing more, because there's always going to be someone doing more than you,
and there's going to be on the other end of the spectrum someone who's absolutely
who's doing less
irresponsible,
than you.
who leaves the tap open and goes out, and you get absolutely furious when you see those things. But yeah, I think there's a lot of that going on, what you just said, right? People doing it out of revenge, or people doing it because, oh my god, the politicians are miserable. Of course we know that, but I think what you pointed out is really important, that when you do that, you can't sustain that feeling, because that anger will burn you out.
I think unfortunately what has happened is that there's a lot of disconnect between, in this situation, action and outcome or result, right? You say global warming, and now you start feeling it in summer, where you say the temperatures are warming up, right? But until recently, you didn't even, in a place like Bangalore, it creeped up so suddenly that you didn't even realize it. The effects
it's
of
literally
global
from
warming,
one season
right?
to the next. There's a significant spike.
And if you order and you throw away plastic, or if you don't use plastic also, there is no immediate result or outcome to any of your actions, right? This is a very intangible space.
It's very invisible, but the damage is very visible.
So I think people, like you need to find, for everyone, they need to find a self of connectedness to this cause, which goes beyond just saying, I'm not going to use plastic, and I'm not going to use the air conditioner, and I'm going to cycle and breathe in this horrible smoke because it's the right thing to do, because you don't get any satisfaction or immediate outcome from doing it, unless you're really motivated and you're able to convince yourself that I've done something really good, which is certainly, there's a small section of people that can do it. For the larger majority, there is no correlation between your sacrifice and the benefit to anyone or anything. And then after some time, it becomes a futile effort, like it just becomes like, okay, anyway, nobody cares. Anyway, people are burning fossil fuels. Anyway, we're in the middle of this third mass extinction. So screw it. I'm just going to have a good time myself.
That's the thing which I've been thinking about, right? It's very easy to sit on your high horse as an individual and say, oh no, don't have more kids, or don't consume single-use plastic, especially in a country like India where 90% of the people have never experienced this kind of luxury before, the kind of spending power now which is coming as a result of globalization, with a kind of expanding economy, with more power of money, middle class. So imagine me going to a person who's never had 3 meals a day and now can because of fertilizers or mass agriculture or whatever the term is, and a person who has access to a smartphone and Swiggy and has a chance to have ice cream on demand. And if I go tell them, no, you can't do this because the plastic being used by Swiggy, they'll just slap me and say, dude, screw you. Who are you to judge me, right? So which is a difficult situation in a country like India or China or Africa, where suddenly there's an emerging class of people who never had access to this or had an opportunity to even, dream that it might be possible. So, I mean, the why is so important, right? Because if I sit there and judge them, it's not fair on them, and it's not fair on me, because I'm going to be frustrated after a point and say, screw this, man, let's just join them if you can't beat them, right? So it's a very interesting space, and you are like, even if you look at the other extreme, like organic farming is the solution, but if that's the case, then you end up like Sri Lanka right now, what's happening, where there's mass famine, there's not enough food for the person. So let's maybe go into the space now of using the Indian subcontinent, South Asia, where we can't obviously use models which are in the US or in Europe, where they might have certain technologies or they might have certain ways which are suitable for there. So let's maybe talk about India with our scale of population, with our very sort of unique yet large scale scenario, which is going to affect the planet. Because if 1.8 billion people, which possibly is our population, start replicating a Western way of consuming, what's the kind of pressure? Because I just sort of read this somewhere recently, where if what we kind of do as India in the next 40 years is so crucial to the planet.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're talking about is a very top of the pyramid mindset, right? And also it's top of the pyramid, and with the added element of being spiritual along with it. It's not like everyone who's top of the pyramid and has all needs satisfied necessarily thinks in terms of trying to alleviate global warming or any of these causes, right? The global warming is an example. It could be poverty, education, or anything that's beneficial to a larger populace. So it is tough, because on the one hand, anyone who has gotten to those heights has had to be very individualistic in pursuing in a very focused manner their own success. And then the expectation is, now that you've arrived, you should think about the larger good, right? It's a paradigm shift, which perhaps not everyone is able to necessarily make as easily or effortlessly. And I think that in many ways that is part of the problem. That you suddenly expect somebody to be this huge success, and we celebrate people who are outcome based, and you see it in our sporting documentaries and the musicians that we make movies about, right? The obsession is about how incredibly focused they were on their goal, and on themselves achieving it. And then now there's this thing that, okay, now that they've arrived, they should give it all away, which maybe not the easiest thing to do, because
it's also contradictory to the message and the narrative that they've been conditioned to, right? When you tell someone that, or to add to the same thing, Varun, is that if someone is really good and they become a result of their hard work and their single-minded focus on themselves to become the most amazing actor, athlete, or celebrity, let's call it a celebrity, and then telling them to preach to the public saying, no, these values are not important, give back. And then people are like, bugger that, dude, I want that success that you've told me is so cool, So it's a very difficult space to be in, where you tell people who are like fans of these famous actors in whatever language, or these celebrities, and they are like, no, I'm telling you, the planet globe. They're like, I'm confused. What is the message you're telling me?
Yeah. It's like the Jim Carrey line, right? He at the commencement speech, I forget which, I think it was Maharishi University, where he said, I hope that you get all the fame and wealth and everything that you truly desire, so that you know that it all really wasn't worth it.
Yeah.
Right.
Which, of course, I can say, like,
but
Jim
again,
Carrey, you're saying it because you had 50 years of it, right?
and exactly, right? So it comes from there, right? Even when you try to spread the message, it can't be well taken because that person had enjoyed it for that long.
Exactly. It's so I think what you are doing now, that's the reason I bring it up, is and of course we'll get back to everything we're speaking about, is because you kind of you highlight this idea, which I'm really fascinated by, is it's always easy to hear a story of passion and success when there's not much to lose. And you said you had a safety net of getting a job, but you never took that safety net, right? I think in the mindset having it, but this thing of once you reach your pinnacle of success, then you're like, you know what, I'll either drop it all and give back, or an actor spirals, a celebrity spirals so much out of control, they go to rehab and they come back like a born again soul who wants to do something good. But there is, what I like about the idea you're talking about and what you're doing, is that you don't have to go to that extreme of success, or you've gone so far beyond that you need to have a born again moment or a near death experience to kind of have this new thing. But there is a middle ground which you can sort of live a family life. You can have a safety net, you need that, but you can also start doing when it's not too late, right?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think all of the things that you said are in some degree possible for everybody, right? I had the luxury of trying to do this early on, so I've been able to pursue that path. I think it may not be easy, depending on what people's commitments are, to completely give that up, because but I think in some degree, and I know that a lot of people do this in a hobbyist approach, right? There are a lot of people who are weekend farmers, who are avid birders and trekkers, and they contribute to all sorts of relief and causes. So
that's an amazing thing to hear. I mean, it wasn't really a question. I just wanted to sort of kind of understand the idea that you don't have to be overwhelmed by people telling you have to be someone, right? You can find your own space. And I think what you just said is really important, is you have to find your motivating factor. The why is more important than the how sometimes. And getting from there to now, what sort of took you into this space? Because it wasn't your dad's farm, which was easy to sort of use because it's a safe place, but you went beyond that. So can you maybe take me through where that entire thing started?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. I think, so when I decided I wasn't going to be pursuing an active career as a chartered accountant in the corporate world, and my father already had this large space of land, which was about 150 acres at the time. It seemed appropriate that I could try to work towards making something that would be alleviating the climate change situation. I think at that time we called it global warming. Now we call it the climate crisis. It's surprising how much things have changed in just 10, 12 years, right? Because it's almost reached like a hysterical pitch sometimes in just 10 years time. But the idea was, to be able to do something that would be useful and helpful. And I needed the venture to be able to be revenue generating. And organic farming seemed a logical step in that direction. So I didn't have the background, but fortunately I had a few of my father's friends who were already on that path. My father himself had been pursuing it without calling it that for several years. And the internet was, a great source of information. So, with all of that, I moved to this farm in Tamil Nadu, and I would stay there 5 days, come back to the city for 2 days, and began organic farming, crop rotation, multi-cropping, using organic fertilizers, using green manure between crop cycles, things like that. So trying to use whatever I had learned into that system. It was challenging because traditional farmers have forgotten the approach now. Since the 1960s, when the Green Revolution came about, they've now become conditioned to think that if you don't use chemical pesticides and fertilizers, crops won't grow. And it has become, to some extent, a self-fulfilling prophecy, because they've destroyed the natural system so far that the plants don't have sufficient microorganisms to help channel nutrition back and forth through the soil to them. So you need to. And so organic farming, especially in barren and dead places, is a challenge. It does.
It's almost like what we've done
seasons.
to the human body with antibiotics, right? We're so
Absolutely.
screwed because of taking too much.
Yeah. It's the same with gut microbiome, right?
Yeah.
If you ruin it beyond a point, it takes a lot of effort to then rejuvenate it. And to some extent, some of those microbes don't even grow back if they're completely eliminated. So, and it's the same with to some extent with organic farming as well, right? It takes a long time to rejuvenate the soil. So, but you need to be able to work it and be patient, which I completely understand that the typical farmer will not have. They're dependent crop to crop. So to expect them to then wait out a few
seasons, and there's not much margin for them, right? A failed crop is basically no food or starvation. It's not. It's not like they have like a cushion to fall back on.
So in 2010, organic farming wasn't really popular in India. It was just catching on, and organic food was almost unheard of. There were a few pockets of people that were aware of what organic food meant, that it was chemical-free, pesticide-free, etc. But the challenge was, one, there was no market for it. Stores weren't retailing it, and two, you expected people to pay more for a product that looked uglier.
You had
more
blemishes
more blemishes. You had smaller tomatoes that were funnily shaped. So it's challenging because people have gotten into it's just natural where the mind appreciates things that are proportionate and look better, right? And you are asking people to go against that. So it's only now that so much of education has built up that organic food has become almost mainstream. But back then it was a real hard sell. So we continued to do it because it was the right thing to do, and invariably we would end up selling a lot of it wholesale because the city couldn't support it, or people didn't really want to pay a premium for things that were harder to produce. But that was perhaps maybe 5-6 years too early for what people were aware of at that time. But it was very fulfilling though, because you spending time out in nature. Learning about all of these ancient practices that had worked for hundreds of years before we decided to ruin it with chemicals, understanding how to rejuvenate soils. So for me it was very refreshing, and it was obvious that I had chosen the right path because I was very interested in consuming more and more information about this and trying to apply it.
Just while you're on this, there is definitely a lot I don't personally, but maybe a lot of people listening as well, don't understand about the value and the sort of connection and the depth, and most importantly the finite, I wouldn't say finite, but the importance, I think, of restoring this particular thing, which is soil, and how important it is, and how little we understand, and how much damage we've already done to it. So maybe can you just explain the concept? Because of course we know soil as mud, or we might know it as whatever it may be. But maybe just explain the vast sort of understanding of, that as a result of what you've studied. But maybe just the layers, or the I mean, it's maybe just it's beyond it's one word, how much there is to soil, and maybe just talk about that.
Sure. I think the fundamental thing that people have to understand is soil is not an inert medium. Right? Soil is alive. We look at it and we think it's dead. That's the biggest eye-opener that people need to come to terms with, right? It's of course it's media, but there's billions and billions of microorganisms just in a handful of soil, and those are the things that allow this planet to survive, essentially.
I mean, we're all from it, right? Technically.
We're all from it, right? It's the source of everything. I mean, when life began from tiny microorganisms from volcanic eruptions and clay, it all began from that one source, right? So, and the thing that to realize is that it takes a long time to develop the humus content of the soil, right? It takes decades.
And how does that happen? Does it happen through just natural like cycles that kind of have happened over the millions and billions of years on this planet, or is there certain environmental influences that make it better or worse? What are the things involved there?
So the fungal network, essentially the mycorrhizal network, right, which is the mycelium network, is what pretty much is the interface between life and death, right? So when things die, fungi then break them down and release those nutrients into the soil that allow various other microorganisms to flourish, and then the carbon cycle in the wood is broken down, and all of these various factors come into play, and it takes several decades to build those layers of soil. So for it to be conducive, you need to have over a period of time a macro environment that supports that breakdown. Like as you move to more and more hostile conditions, you aren't allowing the ability for this fungi to exist, and as a function of that, you've defeated the ability of this cycle to continue the way it has for the last several billion years, right? So in a forest ecosystem where there is the overarching framework of a forest and biodiversity, these fungi flourish, and there's an exchange of nutrition between various trees, between soil and tree, and that's why when something breaks down in a forest and a tree keels over and falls, it's able to disintegrate and go back and become soil, which then provides this fertile medium for other things to grow out of it. Whereas what you see now with desertification is that you've created such a hostile host that even the fungi can't really grow in it, and that's basically the crux of it. This is taken billions of years.
You strip all the trees, and the trees are not going back into the soil, but they're going for your furniture. It's the delay in return of input to the soil is a lot more, and in many cases what goes back finally in is not even a version of something the soil can use, right? Because it's so polluted with additives and chemicals, and the natural form is completely the essence of what is required is not even there in that particular object or whatever it may be.
You need to feed the soil, right? I mean, you need to constantly keep nourishing it for it to be able to constantly keep providing.
So if that's the case, now we live in a world where the practices, as you said, the traditional or the ancient practices are almost wiped out. I don't want to paint that bleak a picture and say it's completely gone, but it's more the norm to use genetically modified seeds, to use fertilizers as a default practice, right? So how does someone like you look at this land, maybe talk about that specific thing, which was completely stripped away by chemical fertilizers, which left the soil for all practical purposes dead? And how do you how do you convince yourself and convince other people to come on board and not just make it a hobby or a romantic practice, but make this something which can flourish and as a result be an example for the next piece of land, right? So what is the framework within which you worked on this?
As I've continued to organic farm, my interest moved away from organic farming into being able to do and create things on a larger scale and to have more of an impact. Because I realized with organic farming, one is I would be restricted to that same piece of land, and two, because of crop cycles and crop rotation, and you end up harvesting things season after season. So there's only so much you can do when it comes to sequestering carbon, right? The gauge of how how much carbon is sequestered to some sense is the girth and size of a tree's trunk. Right? All wood is essentially just carbon that has been solidified and captured by the tree.
So the wider the circumference, the more carbon it's okay.
Yeah. In addition, of course, a lot of carbon just gets channeled back into the ground, but that's invisible. So the tangible aspect, what we can see is that the tree and how large it's grown. So the interest then moved to creating permanent ecosystems that you didn't have to harvest and that would sustain well beyond our lifetime. And essentially, at that point, I realized that humanity would not suffer from a lack of food. We would suffer from a hostile environment. There is already enough food. A lot of it gets wasted and not transported to the right people. That's the challenge.
Food distribution is the problem, not
food distribution.
Production.
So then the interest moved to, okay, how do we create ecosystems that can thrive and replicate that? And that's how we identified this space. It was a barren piece of land. This is in Shoolagiri in Tamil Nadu.
Right.
And I think to a large extent, of course, you do realize that even deserts can be rejuvenated. Everything is just a question of effort, right? So even with this barren land, there was the understanding that it could be rejuvenated, but you always operate from a perspective of hope and faith in many of these, right? Because you've not done it before. At least for me, this was the first time.
Just paint a picture for me. When you see barren land now, is it something which was strip mined? Because we hear of these miners because of going indiscriminate sort of digging and mining for ores and for minerals. So was this that kind of scenario, or was it something which was just so devastated by whatever corporate farming or whatever the practice is? So can you just paint a picture of what you were faced with?
So this was a space that had lost all nutrition in the soil. I think several years of chemical intensive farming had left the soil dead for all practical purposes. So on about 100 acres of land, there must have been maybe, I would say, 30 trees or 40 trees.
That's
hardly
crazy.
anything. And that's actually the situation in many parts of rural India, because they don't understand the value of the tree, because the tree, in many cases, the larger the tree, the more shade on the soil, and when land holdings are very small, they can't afford the tree to then be shading a large amount of their land. So then they cut the tree down and they harvest it so that they get a little bit more space to grow a seasonal crop. So it's unfortunate.
I mean, it's almost like, if you want to draw a parallel, like an analogy, it's like people like developing their beachfront coastline because they want tourists to come, but then it gets so full of development that the entire view which got them that tourist is gone. So it's like the waters are dirty, the beaches are polluted. So it's the same kind of thing. What do you tell a person who owns like a little plot of land on the beach which has a view? Tell them, no, keep this pristine. And he's like, why should I? Because they're not getting me any money, right? It's kind of that mindset. How do you tell someone not to do something when the only way they can sustain their livelihood is by doing it, right?
Yeah, and it's much harder to explain to somebody who hasn't been educated, and explain to them that the tree, provides a beneficial climate to so many birds and bees and pollinators, and that it facilitates microorganisms which are microscopic to grow. These people can't see anything that you're talking about, right? They can't.
Right.
So it's harder for them to even believe it, and it's harder for them to believe it when it comes from somebody from the city who doesn't look like them or sound like them and is just preaching to them. So there are so many challenges with trying to oftentimes convince folks. But that said, I think a lot of NGOs have done a very good job of trying to gradually help many of these farmers, go chemical free, etc. So
that's good to hear, because these people are so. I mean, they don't want to harm the planet. I don't think anyone in that group wants to. But it's so sad that they just get brainwashed, saying, no, your land means nothing. And it's usually maybe the politician, but the middlemen, right, who buy the grain, who buy the crop, they just kind of manipulate their entire belief system, saying that you aren't worth anything. So if that's the premise from which they approach farming, then it's a terrible blow to the way they look at their land, the way they look at their livelihood, right?
Yeah, and also it's a system, right? Fertilizers are so far subsidized that it's very cheap to add chemical fertilizers. They're also rationed out, so it's just been made so easy and convenient,
Right.
and everyone else around you is doing it, so it just becomes the way to do it. It becomes the way to do things.
It's
Um,
terrible. Yeah.
yeah. So this land was also similar in many ways. There was not much vegetation, and we decided to plant trees and grow a forest there. That was essentially the dream, to recreate a forest ecosystem. So we began with the species selection, and for that we looked at the local topography to see the kind of trees that were thriving and had thrived in that environment. You know, Um uh, and we arrived at about 250 species that were in that zone, in in at varying periods of time. You don't see them as commonly, but many of them can thrive in that space, and
They've
all
been there
native
in the
species.
past. Right.
Yeah,
Right. Right.
they've
At
been
some
there,
stage
right?
of the cycle. Right.
Yeah. So we began with that. We ensured that we had a sufficiently high density, because early on you need to create that kind of density, because when climates are harsh, and when you have winds, it's very easy for young saplings to get blown away or to keel over, and so you need the density of a large plantation in the earlier years to help prop up the space. Eventually, natural succession will ensure that the ones that have to thrive and survive will survive, and the
Right.
plantations thin out. Uh, and the
Sorry.
only
So, how
thing we
much would
could
something
do,
like this cost? Because a high density also means more plants, more saplings, and more seeds.
yeah,
So, this would also mean a more capital, right?
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
certainly. I mean, I can't really put a number to it, but uh, over a large area,
Now, let's give percentages because
but
I'm just trying to draw a picture for people who are trying to
but I'm
understand. Okay. Yeah.
yeah, but I'm thinking if you had to plant just one sapling, it would perhaps initially cost you, uh, give or take about anywhere from about 75 to 100 rupees if you wanted to do it well.
Right.
Because
Okay.
in large parts it's the cost of the sapling. You want to ensure that you add enough nutrition in the pit, because the soil is so barren, so that becomes a
Right.
combination of manure, which nourishes it. You add perhaps rice husk, which provides perforation and aeration, and also breaks down into providing silicon. And you add uh, cocoa peat, which can absorb moisture and release it slowly to the plant, right? And then
Right.
once you plant it, you also stake the plant, because it needs to anchor to something.
Yeah.
And of course, there's the cost of the transport, the labor, etc. So give or take, if you do this well, maybe about 100 rupees per sapling.
Yeah, because I also just on that while you mentioned that process, when you hear of a government saying we're cutting down 10,000 trees for a road to be built or a certain
Yeah.
access point to be thing, and then the moment people say protest that idea, and then they're like, no, but we are planting 100,000 trees to compensate for this. How much
Yeah.
of that actually works out? Because you're saying on your 100-acre plot of land, there's
Yeah.
the high density because the yield might be low because of various situations which might be hostile to the plant, or just the success rate is low because of natural selection and natural succession. How much, when people say that we are planting 2 billion trees, is a reality of actually compensating for the stuff which has already been cut? I don't know if that's a topic you've studied, but just maybe you can shine some light on that.
uh, it's unrealistic, to think that you could cut down these trees, which are at that moment sequestering that much of carbon, providing that much of oxygen, and then say that you're going to plant 10 times that, because these trees have taken 50, 80, 100 years to arrive at that space, right? Even if you plant these 10, 20, 30 times the number of trees, it's going to take several years to catch up to that same situation where they are able to sequester that much of carbon, right? Because
Right.
it's almost compounding. The older the tree gets, the more it's able to sequester, the more it's able to produce oxygen, right? So you're not going, and especially in today's time where we're already fighting an uphill battle, saying statistics like, if we don't do this in the next 10 years, you're going to reach an inflection point, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so these trees are not going to be at that point in 10 years, right? It's going to take much longer for them to be able to provide the same benefit. So I don't think I don't think there is a rationale. I think they have to try and compensate for it, but I don't think what they're trying to do is really actually having any immediate benefit, right?
Just sounds a lot cool. It sounds a lot more impactful than it really is, right? Because when someone says
Yeah.
a million trees,
Yeah.
it's just like, oh, you expect a forest with
Yeah.
million fully grown adult big barked trees, but in reality, it's just like a nursery with saplings, which
And we oftentimes don't know how well they've taken, right?
yeah,
Because you can't really nurture and manage a million trees.
yeah,
The government isn't doing that. They're going out there and planting it in forests. You don't know what species they're selecting, right?
right,
Is it a diverse ecosystem with hundreds of trees? Is it a monoculture of just teak trees or silver oak trees, which then makes it even more exciting to cut in a few years? And oftentimes the incentive systems are flawed because in most countries, forest departments are evaluated on the success of number of trees they planted and how many survived,
right,
which then leads them to plant trees which have low death rates and,
right.
and and high survival rates, right? So and oftentimes those trees are weed species.
Like eucalyptus and all those, right?
Yeah, which of course now gradually less and less that's planted, but still things like that,
Yeah.
which are alien, which don't have a natural system to be checked, and which eventually become more trouble than good.
Like grass, like people putting lawns to say, oh, we put
Yeah,
greenery.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah. No, so it's so so just making that statement saying we're going to plant 10 million trees or something, it doesn't help because you don't know what they're planting, where they're planting, how many of them survived, and if they survived, were they causing more harm than good? Uh,
Yeah. No, what's very funny is like now people just say, like token wise, right? Just give plant. Like there was a wedding down the road, and there's this, the palace grounds had a huge wedding. One of these, some big person, I don't know what it was, and there were about 10,000, 12,000 people who attended this wedding, and everyone was given a potted plant. And the gesture is, oh, we're doing something good for the environment. Literally, you get out of that hall, all the pots were just dumped there because people want sweets, man. Why the fuck would they want a pot, right? It was so sad to see these plants
yeah,
just thrown into this
yeah,
big pile. So I'm just
yeah,
like giving an example of people thinking it's a good intention, but you don't have to do that, right? You don't have to think. So anyway, sorry I took away from what you were talking about, the process that you started the land
yeah, yeah,
sort of
yeah,
revitalization with.
yeah,
So maybe we
yeah.
can get
So
back to
yeah,
that.
yeah. So what he essentially did for the first 2 years, and now we continue to do it, but it requires less effort now, is
Yeah.
to just nurture the plant basin, right? Because when you have 100 acres, you can't go about trying to, you can't you can't attend to every square foot of that 100 acres, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
If you have a sapling, which is in one space, you can only try to nourish that sapling.
Yeah.
So we had a very elaborate and extensive drip irrigation network so that we could conserve water and supply water regularly to these plants. And we had a lot of remediation in terms of adding a lot of enzymes and microbes that would help nourish that particular plant basin, So in addition to that, we mulched the soil. The mulching is basically, covering the soil surface.
I used to do
And
that
this,
in college when I used to work in maintenance. I
okay,
used to
nice.
mulch the trees. It was quite fun. Anyway, I
Yeah,
want to ask you while you talk
yeah,
about mulching,
yeah,
sorry, not to
yeah,
interrupt, but
yeah,
so say if you have 100 acres of farmland.
yeah,
Now, if you said you can't cover everything physically, right? It's a little intensive. But say you have 100 by, say you have 1 acre, which is accessible and easily sort of you can ply with various nutrients. Does the soil network pick up on that, and will it spread underground to the rest of the 100 acres, or does every part of the 100 acres need to get that intensity of nutrients?
it certainly will spread, but it's a trickle effect, right?
Okay, okay,
I mean, it'll take longer and longer for the good from that to keep spreading outwards.
but it does
So
spread. There is a way of
yeah, yes,
spreading. Okay, okay,
certainly. So, and because it's what we don't understand is there's an elaborate fungal network under the soil which is constantly spreading, right? Which is
right.
uh, kilometers and I mean, there's a whole notion more recently called the Wood Wide Web, like WWW,
Right.
which is the entire fungal network which covers the entire planet. And these are mycelium networks that are helping trees communicate with each other when there are pest attacks. There are trees that are exchanging nutrition through these fungal networks. So this is actually a fundamental structure that allows the ecosystem to thrive.
Yeah.
And these are perhaps some of the oldest living life forms that we are aware of. They're about
And they span
3
oceans as well, right? They can communicate under water because they're, of course, we think that once the soil ends, it's the beach, it's the ocean, it's the end. No, but they have, while it might not, there are underground plants, underground ecosystems of things that we don't even know sometimes because the species that we haven't even discovered. So these things aren't isolated just to a landmass. They go through underwater systems, underground, under oceans to communicate across continents and things, right? So it's quite a vast thing which we are so oblivious of for many of us.
Yeah. I mean, this is it's the fundamental structure of this planet, right? The mycelium network.
Okay.
It really allows life to function the way it does, because if you didn't have that and you didn't have dead matter decomposing back into earth, and then the cycle, you would just have carcasses lying around, and you would have no way of that rejuvenating the system again, right? So fungal networks are what really allow life to flourish. So to your question of if you had 1 acre which was thriving, would that benefit move? It certainly would. It's just amount of time that it would take. So you could so you're best placed addressing as large an area as you can, as best as you can.
Got it.
So our effort was directed plant by plant in every plant basin, and the idea was to, initially it was just this plain black and white idea of, okay, let us plant trees and help alleviate the climate change solution, etc. But as the journey progresses, you realize there's just so much beauty to this whole process. Like you fall in love with ecological restoration, because you see all of life then step into that space, which begins with these small, tiny insects and worms. And then gradually you have the small birds that come to eat those, and then you have larger birds of prey, and you have snakes and mongoose and wild peacocks and hare, and and it's very fulfilling, because you're able to see the space be able to support larger and larger life, and
it's
even
like planning a party for 2 people, but the next thing like 30 people start joining it. It's like it's quite cool.
It is. It's beautiful to see how nature can really rejuvenate, and I think the important thing is, I mean, for me, it's been that you realize that you don't know, and your only role becomes to allow the space to thrive by adding as much nutrition that you can to it, right? Because it will evolve in a completely random pattern, as all life has, right? So there's the understanding is that you continue to be shepherds of the space, where you don't try to tinker too much with the process that's going on, but
and
just
you can't
only
manipulate,
so much.
right? Can you? I mean, after a point, you can't manipulate this kind of environmental growth because it's so ancient, and when you try to impose a linear way of growth, it just sort of messes things up, right?
Yeah, certainly. But I think the thing is, with so much of science and information available, we often think that we know best, but sometimes it's better to allow nature to take its own course. The idea was to be able to allow this space to flourish and build a community around it, and so that more people could live in this natural space, and we could then serve as an example for several others, and then continue to this process of afforestation elsewhere. And for me, because I spent so much time away from the cities over the last decade, the idea of being in closer in sort of in nature was very key. And
maybe that's why you started running. You were running away from it was a subconscious reaction, Varun, that you needed to run away from the city. No, that's beautiful,
perhaps.
man. I mean, it's quite
Yeah,
remarkable because from that barren land now, of course, you have a thriving ecosystem. Of course, it's a multi-individual effort which has resulted in this 100
yeah,
acres being
yeah,
born again and
yeah.
thriving to a large extent with the multi-species. So maybe, of course, I think talking about it, of course, is very important, but also I'd like people, especially if they're in Bangalore, to come and see it, and maybe if they could join you, and maybe you can talk about how they can maybe start their own thing. Maybe if they want to be a part of your initiative, also talk us through that, and
Yeah, sure.
yeah, and maybe how more of these examples can help a city like Bangalore, which is a population of almost 18 million people, and how these kind of initiatives by individuals, by small groups of people, can give some semblance of hope and maintain some semblance of what we have, as opposed to completely going to the extreme of wiping it all out and then starting from scratch.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I'd be happy to. So the way we've approached it is a community approach. So the space is called Vanantara, which is a combination of two words, Vana and Antara, and it means inside the forest, because
Okay.
I felt it was important to be able to create this experience of wild nature. Because oftentimes, even when we think we are going into green spaces, they are highly manicured.
Yeah.
Whereas we wanted this space to be raw in many ways. I think perhaps a little esoteric, but I find that the energies of these untouched wild spaces are always in balance, and that has an incredible way of affecting us as well, right? We are all just we're all just matter and energy vibrating at a certain frequency. So being in a space that's balanced has several beneficial effects on us as well.
Yeah, the connection is a lot deeper, right? It's not just the idea of walking in a park, because as you said, those are manipulated environments, but it must be quite an amazing feeling just to kind of go beyond a man-made notion of what is the connection to the earth, right? This is truly, you just feel it. You can't maybe put a word to it or a label to it or a concept.
I mean, it's I think it's Einstein, but I'm not sure who said it. The quote was, "The fish will be the last to know the water." And I think we move through life without realizing that we are connected actually through this medium of air and through this earth, and ignoring the fact that we're all connected through this space.
Yeah.
And that everything and everyone that we're around actually has some sort of an effect on us.
It's so impossible to understand that in an age where social media is the so-called connection we find between amongst each other, which is the most interesting thing, which alienates us. But this is so good to hear that, what happens to, I mean, we think sometimes, oh, the California wildfires, nothing's going to happen to me because I'm sitting in Bangalore. But what you're saying is that there is a message going through the underground network, which might not come immediately like a Skype call or whatever, but there is a message being passed through the entire planet's underground network, which is saying the planet is unhealthy, or the planet is going through some change, or the planet needs to correct itself in some form, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's the whole idea of looking inward and looking outward, right? I mean, when you drill down into the atomic structure of every person, when you go outwards into earth and space, etc., like the whole idea is, sometimes there is no differentiation, right? And what affects one part of your body affects all of you, and in the same way, what affects one part of this planet affects all of it.
And beyond.
So it's quite obvious that everything has an effect, and you just choose to ignore it.
I think that's an important statement. We just choose to ignore it. But no,
so coming back to your question, so the way we've approached it is we've chosen to be a community of like-minded folks who've now come together, and we continue to afforest this space. Everyone individually owns their identified space of land, but we have no boundaries. It's completely open. We have only natural boundaries that help people identify their space, and the idea is to not only help afforest our space, but to continue to work with the local bodies to afforest government lands outside, because governments have the ability to do that. They have, with the Manrega scheme, they have to provide employment to people. They have forest nurseries that have trees, and they have government lands that are fallow, right?
So they're not looking to take over this land. You're just looking to rejuvenate it. So their motivation, like, oh, these guys are not land sharks. These guys genuinely want to think, which is a great.
Can we just have a Can we just have a dialogue with them to help channel that? But that's the next step. Right now we still have our hands full trying to ensure that this space serves as a model and an example,
which is amazing.
And I think, so if anyone is interested, our website is www.vanantara.com, and our Instagram page is Vanantara Forest Farms to get a sense of what we're trying to do. And the ideal is if this serves as a model and other people would like to replicate it, because then it just allows that ripple effect to continue to grow further and further, and to afforest larger and larger amounts of land. What's been interesting is, as a function of what we're doing, there have been people who already have large spaces of land themselves, 75 acres, 100 acres, 50 acres, who've asked us if we could help them and guide them forest their lands as well, which is also a great opportunity, because even if they're not keen on setting those up as communities, but just from their own perhaps altruistic perspective of afforesting the land and retaining it for themselves, that also serves an invaluable service.
We have more, then we end up getting more of these little micro habitats amongst these cultivated land masses, which, as you said, might not be the most effective, but at least it's better than completely barren lands, right? So these things give back in the micro WWW.
There's a beautiful quote by, I think it was Masanobu Fukuoka, who said that rain doesn't come from above, rain comes from below. And what he meant was rain clouds can only move in about, give or take 100 or 150 kilometers before there is cloud burst when they move in from the sea.
Right.
You need ecosystems to then catch that rain, to use that water, to then transpire and push those clouds further in. Right.
So it's almost like a waste stop mechanism. Like right.
So if you damage ecosystems in a haphazard manner, you will find that it will be harder and harder to find rain inland as time goes by.
Right.
So to begin with, coastal forests are critical. Critical because that's the first point where you catch rain and move it inwards.
Sort of like fuel stations for the clouds to move along. Yeah.
Absolutely. Right. And all of these endeavors help that cause, because even if it's a small pocket here and a small pocket there, it just continues to help move rain clouds inwards.
Does something as simple as, say, someone like, I live in a flat in the city and I don't really have a piece of land to grow stuff, but is there anything we can do, just sort of like a homegrown solution that we can help with, because we live in a concrete block, but is there something we can do in our little environment to facilitate this, whether it's to contribute to the larger network, because it's most often potted plants, it's most often these kinds of things. So is there any small contribution that can be done by people like me and others?
So I feel in the cities, one of the largest things, so global warming is not really a climate change problem, right? Global warming is a consumption problem.
Right.
The reason we have global warming is because people consume too much. That's all it is. So if we step back and we stop acting like this is this climate change problem, and this is so larger than me, and the planet is heating up, and you step back and realize that it's only because everyone consumes too much and everyone wants that next gadget and gizmo and shirt and trouser and whatnot, and that's the cause of it. Then you realize that you have the power to do something to fix this, right? So essentially, if you fix the consumption problem in itself, you're doing much more than perhaps planting a few trees, right?
So you take up less of the resources as opposed to taking more and putting some back.
And that's why when you start with those 3 R's, you say reduce, reuse, recycle, right? There's a reason why you say reduce first.
Yeah.
So that's one. I think more than people planting a few potted plants, and which is of course good, right? But if the perspective is what is the maximum amount that I can do as an individual, and again, not from a sense of sacrifice, right? Because that's not a great place to operate from, but if the purpose is what can I do, then first step is, okay, how do you reduce your consumption without affecting your lifestyle and feeling bitter about it? Two is, I think there's so more recently over the last 2.5 years, we've also been planting Miyawaki forests in the city, and we've planted 3 of them. And
what is exactly? Can you? I'm not aware of that.
So Miyawaki forest is a high density forest. You plant trees very close to each other, about 2.5-3 feet apart. You replicate the biodiversity of a typical forest, and that's how you ensure that the ecosystem is to some extent.
What sort of space are you looking at here?
So typically, we've done this in large gated communities, right? So
okay. Nice.
So we've done it at three projects. One is at Brigade Tech Gardens. The one is Brigade Utopia and Brigade Eldorado. They've been open to the idea of considering this as an alternative to conventional landscape. The reason this I'm very upbeat about this in urban situations is because these are again sustainable ecosystems. Over a period of time, what happens is you plant it as a tree-based ecosystem. You plant it very close by. Of course, the competition for light and nutrition helps spur these trees to grow taller faster, and they grow very thick. Because when you plant things about 2.5-3 feet apart, they become very dense thickets. So they also facilitate habitat for a lot of small life that's been displaced in the city.
Right, which of course would have existed because now of the concreting of these things, they can't. Nice. So that's such a nice thing to have within your complex of.
And it's an alternative to lawn and small shrubs, which though sometimes people have gotten used to how aesthetic they are continue to be drains on water and regularly require a lot of pesticides, etc. Right, and I think it's fundamental to understand and appreciate that you have to be able to produce oxygen in the place that you live in. Right now, you find yourself living in a city like Bangalore where you get your water from Kaveri, which is very far away. You get clean air and oxygen from the outskirts of the city, from remaining pockets of green. It's a very bizarre way to live. So at least if you create these ecosystems at home, and these can be done even in backyards, of people's houses, you're at least creating some kind of an impact.
Good to know. Good to know that it's doable even in an apartment, in a concrete sort of jungle. So that's really, man, I'm telling you, man, I never dreamed of this situation. I don't think anyone wanted to dream of it even, but I'm so glad that people like you and groups like Vanantara are doing this. So I think I'll definitely drop the links to your website and the page, your social media page. But I think thanks for sharing what you've done, and thanks for getting on this episode with me. And I think on behalf of everyone listening as well, I think hats off to your efforts.
Thanks a lot. It's been thanks for throwing some light on what we're doing, and it's
my pleasure.
Always a pleasure speaking to you.
For sure, man. I mean, it's great. I think it's long overdue that we've been chatting, but I think I wanted to cover this work you're doing on the podcast. So thanks for taking the time, and good luck running like Forrest Gump. I'm sure it's a fun activity, and love to your family, and we'll catch up soon.
On that note, part of our afforestation efforts also are called Run Forest Run. Strong.
Nice. I like it. I like it a lot. Good stuff. Congratulations, bro. Thank you. And
Thank you,
good luck with everything in the future.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.